The dust settled across the porch as Martha Hendricks climbed down from the wagon, her 3 children clinging to her skirts like shadows. They hadn't spoken in miles, too tired and too hungry for words. The youngest, a girl of maybe 4, had her thumb in her mouth and eyes that seemed too old for her face. The ranch house before them wasn't grand, but it was solid. More solid than anything Martha had seen in weeks of traveling through this unforgiving territory. She hadn't meant to stop here. Pride had kept her moving from town to town, looking for work, looking for anything. But the children were beyond exhausted, and when she saw the sign marking the entrance to the Cross Creek Ranch, something in her broke. Not her spirit exactly, but her resolve to keep suffering in silence. A man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his trousers. He was tall, somewhere in his 40s perhaps, with lines around his eyes that spoke of years squinting into the sun. His hair was dark with threads of silver, and he moved with the deliberate pace of someone who had learned not to waste energy in the heat. "Help you, ma'am." His voice was neither warm nor cold, just cautious. Strangers usually meant trouble or sales, neither of which were particularly welcome. Martha opened her mouth to speak, but her daughter Sarah, the oldest at 9, spoke first in a voice barely above a whisper. "We haven't eaten in 5 days." The words hung in the air like an accusation, though none was intended. Martha felt her face flush with shame. She had tried to make half rations last, had given most of her portions to the children, but the money had simply run out. Her husband James had died 6 months ago when his horse threw him into a ravine, and the bank had wasted no time claiming their small farm for the debts he'd accumulated during the drought years. The rancher's expression shifted, something softening in those weathered features. He looked at the children properly then, taking in their hollow cheeks and the way they leaned against their mother not from affection but from weakness. 5 days, he repeated, and it wasn't a question. He turned toward the house. "Come inside. All of you." Martha felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. "We can work. I can cook, clean. The children can help with." "Inside first," he interrupted, not unkindly. "We'll talk about everything else after you've eaten." The kitchen was clean and spare, the kind of room that spoke of a solitary man making do. He moved around it with surprising efficiency, setting out bread and butter, cold meat from the larder, milk from the icebox. He sliced thick pieces of bread and didn't speak as the children fell upon the food with a desperation that made Martha's heart ache. "Slowly," she cautioned them, remembering stories of people who'd made themselves sick eating too fast after going without. But they barely heard her, and the rancher, he still hadn't given his name, brought out jam and cheese and apples from a barrel in the pantry. Martha ate too, though shame made each bite difficult to swallow. She watched the man who called himself Thomas Cross when he finally introduced himself, watched him refill milk glasses and cut more bread without any trace of resentment or impatience on his face. When the children had finally slowed, their stomachs no longer dictating every thought, Thomas poured coffee for himself and Martha and sat down across from her at the wooden table. "Your husband?" he asked simply. "Dead. 6 months. We lost the farm. I've been looking for work, but nobody wants to hire a woman with 3 children in tow. The towns we pass through, they're all struggling too. Everyone's holding tight to what they have." The words came out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly might make them hurt less. Thomas nodded slowly. "It's been a hard few years for everyone." He paused, seemed to be considering something. "I could use help here. Cook quit 2 months back to get married. My ranch hands complain daily about my biscuits, and they're right to. House could use a woman's touch too, I suppose." Hope flared in Martha's chest, painful in its intensity. "I'm a good cook. I can clean, mend, manage a household. The children won't be any trouble. Sarah's responsible, and the boys can help with chores once they're stronger." "I can see that." Thomas's eyes moved to where Sarah was helping her younger siblings, wiping faces with a napkin, maternal beyond her years. "Thing is, ma'am, and I'll speak plainly because I'm not good at talking around things, there's going to be talk if you're living here. This isn't a city where people mind their business. Folks notice things, and they talk." Martha felt her hope begin to crumble. She understood what he meant. A widow and a bachelor under one roof would set tongues wagging in any small community. Impropriety would be assumed, and any children would suffer for it, whispered about and shunned. "I understand," she said quietly. "We'll be moving on then. Thank you for the meal. You've been more than kind. Hold on now, I wasn't finished." Thomas's voice had an edge of something that might have been amusement. "I was going to say, there's a preacher in town. Rode past his place on the way back from buying supplies yesterday. If you're agreeable, we could solve both problems at once. You'd have a home and security. The children would have a roof over their heads and food in their bellies. I'd have someone to cook and manage the house. It would be a business arrangement more than anything else, but it would be legitimate in the eyes of the law and the community." Martha stared at him, certain she'd misunderstood. "You're asking me to marry you? You don't even know me. I could be a terrible cook. I could be mean-tempered or lazy or—" "Could be," Thomas agreed. "But I don't think you are. Anyone who's kept 3 children alive and moving for weeks on next to nothing has backbone and determination. Anyone who whispers rather than shouts when asking for help has dignity. And anyone whose children are polite and helpful even when they're half-starved has been a good mother." He took a sip of his coffee. "I'm not offering romance, Mrs. Hendricks. I'm offering partnership. A practical solution to practical problems." Martha looked at her children. Sarah was watching her with those 2 old eyes, understanding more than a 9-year-old should. The boys were already looking more alert, color returning to their faces with food in their stomachs. The little one had fallen asleep with her head on the table, peaceful in a way Martha hadn't seen in weeks. "I won't pretend to love you," she said finally, meeting Thomas's gaze directly. "I loved my husband. I may never feel that way again. I'm not asking you to. I loved my wife. She died bringing our son into the world 7 years ago. He lived 3 days." The pain in his voice was old but still present. "Neither of us is looking for grand passion. But we could build something decent together. Something stable." The practicality of it should have felt cold, but somehow it didn't. There was honesty in this arrangement, a clarity that felt almost refreshing after months of uncertainty and fear. "The children," Martha said. "They would be yours too. Legally. I'd need that promise. I'd expect nothing less. If we do this, we do it properly. They take my name, same as you. They're cross children from the day we sign the papers." Martha felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of worry that had been choking her for months. This stranger was offering more than shelter and food. He was offering belonging, identity, a future that extended beyond the next meal or the next town. "Why?" she asked. "You could hire someone, bring in a cook and housekeeper without complicating things this way." Thomas was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I'm 43 years old. This ranch will be worth something someday, but there's no one to leave it to. I work from dawn to dusk, and I come home to an empty house that gets colder every year. I'm not looking for charity cases, Mrs. Hendricks, and I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to build something that outlasts me. Children who'll remember me. A home instead of just a house. Maybe that's selfish in its own way." It was honest, at least. Martha appreciated that more than pretty words would have meant. "I'll need time to think," she began, but even as she said it, she knew there wasn't really a choice to make. She could keep moving, keep searching for work that didn't exist, watch her children grow thinner and weaker. Or she could accept this extraordinary offer from a man who seemed decent, whose eyes were kind even if his words were blunt. "We'll go to town tomorrow," she heard herself say. "If the offer still stands in the morning." Thomas nodded. "It'll stand." That night, Martha and the children slept in real beds for the first time in weeks. Thomas had prepared rooms that smelled of lavender and fresh sheets, and Martha lay awake long after the children's breathing had deepened into sleep. She thought about James, about the love they'd shared, about the plans they'd made that had died with him on that rocky hillside. She thought about the stranger who'd offered bread and then offered his name, binding his future to hers with the same straightforward practicality. He seemed to approach everything. It wasn't the life she'd imagined. But imagined lives were luxuries for people who had choices. She had 3 children who needed stability, who needed to stop being afraid. And Thomas Cross, whatever his motivations, was offering exactly that. In the morning, Thomas hitched up the wagon, and they rode to town in silence that was almost comfortable. The preacher was surprised but asked no awkward questions. The ceremony was brief, the words familiar but strange in this context. When Thomas slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his mother's, he said quietly. Martha felt the full weight of what they were doing settle over her. They were married. She was Martha Cross now, and her children bore that name too. In the span of 24 hours, she'd gone from desperate widow to rancher's wife. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Thomas didn't try to fill the silence with false promises or awkward pleasantries. When they arrived, he helped her down from the wagon with the same courteous distance he'd maintained throughout. "I'll show you where everything is," he said. "Kitchen supplies, larder, linens. You run the house however you see fit. The ranch is my domain, the home is yours." It was clear, simple, the boundaries of their arrangement spelled out. That evening, Martha cooked her first meal as Martha Cross. She made stew from beef and vegetables from the root cellar, biscuits that actually rose properly, apple pie from those barrel apples. Thomas and the ranch hands ate with appreciation that needed no words, and her children smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. After dinner, as Martha cleaned the kitchen and Thomas sat reading by lamplight, Sarah approached him shyly. "Mr. Cross?" "Sir." He looked up. "You can call me Pa if you'd like. Or Thomas if that's easier." "Pa," Sarah tried the word carefully. "Thank you. For helping us. For giving us your name." Thomas's expression softened in a way Martha hadn't seen before. "Thank you for being brave enough to ask for help when you needed it. That takes more courage than people know." Martha watched from the doorway as this strange new family of hers found its footing. It wasn't love, not yet. But it was something. Partnership. Hope. A foundation on which something more might eventually be built. That night, as she lay in her own room, Thomas had been clear about that boundary. Martha touched the ring on her finger and allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would all be all right.